Okay.
Okay. Alrighty. Well, we're here with Jeff. Wait, is it Clavier? Did I say it right?
Yep.
All right, sweet. The founder and managing director at SoftTechVC. He's invested in a lot of amazing startups, including Fab, Mint, SendGrid, BetterWorks. This kind of sounds like the suite of all the applications that I've used in my life. So lots of good investments. And Jeff, why don't you take a minute to just tell a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Sure. So very happy to be here and very excited to be at the web again, since I think I have the privilege of being the only speaker who's done all the webs. So about 8 years ago, I started SoftTechVC, which is a firm focusing on the early stage, mostly in Silicon Valley, but investing also in New York and Southern California and Boulder. And what we do is invest roughly $400K per company, 20 companies a year, focusing on consumer internet and the consumerization of the enterprise. And we're one of the early micro VC, so I was an angel, then super angel, then micro VC, whatever they call us, and we have now invested in 120 companies, and our focus is really to be the largest or second largest investor in the seed round of those companies and help them get to the next round, after 12 to 18 months by providing support, help, introductions, and a lot of legwork on behalf of the entrepreneurs. I can't hear you, David.
Oh, hello? Can you hear me? All right, great.
You muted.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it, limit the background noise here. Very cool. So why do you choose to focus on consumer tech?
So back in 2004, 2005, I saw the emergence of this next generation or back then, the emergence of this new generation of companies, and they were tremendously capital efficient. They were able to build the companies, get a business going, roll out a product on a very small amount of money. Roughly at that time, 250K, 300K, 500K was enough. And so I thought that it would create essentially a brand new generation of fundamental startup that would become huge businesses, and I decided to just focus my energy on that. And first and foremost, I put my money where my mouth was, and so I invested my own money for about 3.5 years, and then raised one of the first micro VC funds, $15 million fund 2, and now we're investing our $55 million fund 3.
So you were one of the first micro VC funds. What was that like at that time?
Today it sounds like everyone and his mother has, is an angel or a micro VC. At that time, there was literally a handful of us. So the very first micro VC fund was First Round Capital. My good friend and mentor, Josh Koppelman, sort of started back in 04, 05 with small $10 million funds. And then, Mike Maples, Michael Deering, Steve Anderson, got going. And so I would say at the beginning, there was just a handful of us. I would say 10, 15 people were the main investors in this new generation of consumer internet companies. And I think in 2006, we were crowned the kingmakers of Web 2.0, which was a pretty ridiculous sort of title, but that was it. There was a handful of people who were crazy enough to believe in this next generation of web companies, and we're lucky to be one of them.
That's awesome. So what are the companies that are really exciting you today, or the ones that, what are the kinds of companies that you really look to invest?
So we focus our effort and investments on 3 main categories today. Next generation commerce, and I would say that the one which is the most well known in the category is Fab. We were lucky to be a seed investor in the company. Actually invested about a year ago. We do a lot of mobility. So mobility is 2 things. One is mobile services and infrastructure. We've done Postmates, we've done Geekwoke, we've done quite a few of those. But everything we do has a mobile component, obviously. And so we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to help companies around mobile user acquisition, retention, messaging, and so on and so forth, which is obviously very key but challenging in given the state of play of infrastructure and sort of advertising tools available. And so we're trying to build that ecosystem. And then finally, we've always done a lot of SaaS investments. We talked about Eventbrite. You mentioned that we're in SendGrid. We've done Wildfire. That's one of our key categories, and we keep on investing pretty heavily in the space. So mobility, commerce, and SaaS.
So the mobile world's, becoming more and more interesting every day. Everyone's got a smartphone today. Android's blowing up. What do you think are the major challenges for someone who's trying to start a mobile app because there's so much noise today?
Discovery is definitely the number one challenge. So how do you get noticed, and how do you get this initial sort of spike of users adopting your product so that you can get in the top 10 or top 25, applications that will sort of get you a lot of organic traffic. A lot of the tools that were available, or the ways to actually acquire users on mobile, have either been removed because Apple didn't like the fact that you could cheat, those top 10 lists. So figuring out how to get that conversion to installation, and once you have actually someone installing your application, how do you retain those users is definitely a key issue. And one of the answers is just build a great product. The reason why Instagram has, I'm not even sure where they are now in terms of tens of millions of users, but the reason why Instagram managed to get all those initial users is because it was a fantastic product that was just focusing on one thing, pleasing the users with a pretty unique and very seamless experience. And so if you get that, you will get a lot of people sort of raving about your product. You will build a strong community. You will get a lot of earned media, which is basically people pimping your product, and that's sort of the best way to build a fast-growing sort of user base. That's sort of the nirvana. We're trying to, sort of help companies reach users with companies like Vongol, which is one of our investments we disclosed recently, which is building this ad network where you can have a 16-second video of an application with a voiceover played, as an ad unit, and that will hopefully give you the ability to get users that way. But it's tricky.
Very cool. Yeah, it's an exciting world right now, but yeah, mobile's definitely a tough one. So we have a good question here from one of our followers. So he's asking. So they came from Moscow. In Moscow, and they wanted to use a lot of the metrics about the traction that they received over in Moscow and Russia, but they just moved to San Francisco, and he's found that people tend to downplay the traction or the results that they've found in Russia. So how mandatory, he's asking, is it for traction to be only in San Francisco, or to get traction in San Francisco today?
I'm not sure whether it's purely San Francisco versus U.S. versus international. So a lot of the metrics that we'll look at is, can we get a meaningful amount of users in the U.S. because we know, this is a market that we know well, and this is where we know that you can actually monetize. And so even though it's kind of interesting to see that someone is getting traction in Moscow or their local sort of market, we can't really do much with it because this is not something that we know how to monetize or monetize well. And so typically we'll look at the US traffic or the US community and see whether we can grow that the same way the community grew in Moscow or the local market.
Very cool. Well, hope that was helpful. So I think one space that's really interesting right now is the payment space, which I have a feeling you have some interesting takes on that, given your experience in e-commerce and mobile. So things like Square, things like Dwolla. What are your thoughts on that world? Is it too early for it to be really adoptable in the consumer internet, or Is that really the future?
Well, it's certainly been a very interesting yet very, very challenging space to build very large companies, because you have a lot of regulations, banking, fraud that you have to deal with. So we have a company called Card.io in the space, which has been doing well. Those guys have a payment stack on mobile, on Android and iOS, and their flagship sort of functionality is to be able to take a picture of your credit card as opposed to punching the 16 numbers. And they've been integrated by, PayPal and Uber and a few sort of visible companies, but getting distribution in that space is, and getting to a meaningful footprint is the only way to build a sustainable company. So it's very challenging for a payment startup to prove itself on a capital efficient basis. So the way we think about sort of the cost of failure, which is how much do we need to spend to actually figure out that a given concept was a bad idea in the first place, is roughly $500,000. And you can't really prove a payment company on $500,000. If you look at Square, if you look at all the payments companies, they've all raised tens of millions of dollars, if not more, because it's what it takes to actually build the risk management, the fraud management, the whole backend that is required in a payment company. So yes, payments are holistically interesting, but it's not for the faint of the heart, and those aren't the kinds of things that you can sort of figure out on a napkin.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that you could probably relate to a lot of e-commerce sites as well, as a lot of them take a lot to get going. Do you find that you're able to prove the model of things like Fab or other e-commerce sites just with $500,000?
$500,000 might be sort of a stretch, but what you could prove very early on is that you have the initial sort of user acquisition strategy, or the referral programs that will sort of work, and so you can establish a lot of the user funnel and the user flow without having the product actually, because you can use a lot of landing pages and surveys and so on and so forth to try and refine that funnel. I would say that we proved that Fab was onto something on not $500,000, but just a couple of $1,000,000. And remember, there was a pivot involved, right? But if you look at Whittleby, if you look at True, which is a company that just launched this morning, it's one of our e-commerce companies, those guys can actually achieve a lot and prove user acquisition, initial retention, and see how the product just fits to their targeted market on less than a couple of $1,000,000, which is pretty awesome for e-commerce companies, especially if they don't have to take inventory, which is always sort of a big challenge from a cash management and balance sheet perspective.
Cool. It's an interesting space for sure. We'll see if any of them are actually able to get wide adoption from consumers. Yeah,
I think the question for us is not can they be successful. We think that a lot of the companies that we invest in will be able to sort of take off and get to a first sort of minimal footprint. The question is, can they get to hundreds of millions in GMV, which is the only way to build a big e-commerce play, because by definition, even if you're not taking inventory, you will always have an issue of gross margin because you have to pay for the product. So it will be sort of a massive distribution play, and how good you are at acquiring users and more importantly retaining users is going to be something that we're going to try and prove over the 18 months of the seed round.
So that's an interesting topic, because I'm sure you get a lot of companies who come to you and they'll show their growth patterns, or they'll show the traction that they're getting early on. To what extent do you look towards user retention and ongoing long-term retention versus just initial growth?
To be honest, well, it sort of depends on the type of company, and you have to sort of understand what sort of usage pattern you're going to create for a given type of application. But in this day and age, it's very easy to create a pretty aggressive viral growth, and so what matters for us in those cases is the actual engagement. So time on site, organic growth, organic retention, how much, what is the net promoter score of a company? So would people actually, promote something, or do they feel that they have been spammed and tricked into joining a service? Which unfortunately happens these days with Facebook and Twitter and so on and so forth, because you have a lot of really great viral engineers where those guys would be able to get millions of users to anything, and therefore that growth curve doesn't mean zilch. What matters is, okay, once you have someone signed up on the service, how many times do they come back over following, 30 days? What is the percentage of your users who are fanatics? And depending on the type of application, we'll look at the daily or the weekly retention. And so we look at all those sort of more refined metrics to see whether this is something which works really well. We talked about Fab. The thing which is sort of amazing with Fab is that people will really sort of click on the daily email just to look at the fabulous products that Bradford and his team, Bradford is the co-founder of Fab, have sort of come up with.
Yep, people get obsessed with it.
Yep.
That's good. So we have another question here that kind of goes back to location from Ron on our Google Plus wall. So he's saying that even within San Francisco, or within the Bay Area, you're seeing migration of startups from Silicon Valley to the urban center of San Francisco, to Soma. And so he's curious about other locales like London, like Tel Aviv, like Berlin, Sao Paulo, like these places that, the web was put together to make, startups globally accessible and to bring together the global startup, community. So how much are you putting focus on these other kinds of communities?
So it's really a sort of a good news, bad news kind of story here, because there's certainly a very established ecosystem in Tel Aviv, and it's been for the longest time. However, there's nothing like Silicon Valley anywhere in the world, and no one should try and actually replicate Silicon Valley, because it took 40 years to get there, and so it's sort of it's a lost battle even before you start fighting it. And so the question is, where can you get the components of the money, the entrepreneurs, the established mentors or entrepreneurs who have actually sort of succeeded and can now help the new breeds to come together and create this support infrastructure that is so prevalent here, where you can't walk on university in Palo Alto without meeting a couple of entrepreneurs and VCs and everything. So there's definitely something happening in London, and it's been for a couple of years. I was in Berlin last December, and I was really sort of enthusiastic about the energy which I saw with those entrepreneurs. The problem is that typically the money is just not there. Sao Paulo, there's a lot of activity in Brazil, especially in e-commerce. So there's a lot of really interesting developments. But we, SoftTech as a fund, really mostly focus on the US market. And we've done a couple of deals in Europe, where I'm coming from. But that's more sort of the exception. What we've done, though, is bring 3 teams of British entrepreneurs to the US. And so we like our European entrepreneurs if they build a company here.
What are some things, so you've had experience in both kind of environments now. What are some things that you think, a startup community like the one in London can take from other successful startup communities and apply to their own community there?
I think it's mostly, and they're doing it, and they're doing it their own way, right? It's basically getting startups to openly share their successes and their failures. And so there's a very strong sort of sharing happening right now, which is really not what used to be the case with European entrepreneurs, 5 or 10 years ago, where things were just built in isolation. Now there is a strong sharing of, techniques, of things that have worked out for given companies that can therefore benefit the ecosystem. There's this notion here in the Valley of sort of paid forward, where you're going to help someone without really knowing what you're going to get out of it. And I think that this is a mentality that is developing in a couple of parts of Europe. The big issue, I think, is the just availability of capital from early stage or angels is just not at the same level as we have here, where there's almost too much money in the valley now chasing those early stage deals. This is something that I'm sure our London or Berlin cousins would love to have.
Keep forgetting to unmute myself. So there's another question here from, who's it from? From Ron, who's asking, with the example of Fab or any other of your portfolio companies, when they're entering a space where there's already like a lot of competition, how do you help them to differentiate themselves from the existing market leaders?
I think it's really about trying to create a specific sort of brand message and sort of product that will clearly differentiate the experience. In the case of Fab, yes, there was One Kings Lane and Guild and a lot of sort of entrants in the flash sales world, but they just attacked a very specific segment, which is sort of design, with a product which has sort of a pretty unique experience. And if you look at Fab today, it's one of the best, and obviously I'm pimping it because I'm an investor, but it's one of the best implementations of a social commerce sort of platform. And then there is this sort of unique curation of the products, the designs that go on the site that have created a voice for Fab. And the question is, and that was sort of our question early on, how big is the community of people who will actually buy on Fab, because those are very specific types of products. And the magic of this selection that Bradford and his team of designers are doing every day is that there's really something for every taste and at all prices and ranges and colors. And so there's always something for you on Fab. And this ability to bring this curation and this product, which is pretty unique, has created that sort of crazy growth that we've been witnessing for the past year.
Very cool. I know a lot of people are excited to hear more about Fab from Jason and everyone at Low Web.
Yes, I'm very excited for that session. We should get some good nuggets here.
It's a good story. It's a really good startup story. And so, like on that note as well, I would love to hear a little bit about what you look for in a founder.
So if you're going after a traditional sort of consumer internet company, you're going to have to be really good at two things or three things. One is distribution. So how do you get users? How do you retain users? Understanding, the whole sort of user flow. Design. So design has become really sort of a prevalent, very, very important sort of set of qualities and skills that you need to master. And what's interesting is that whether it's distribution or design, it's actually not technical. And so only, the third piece or the third leg of the stool is, the ability to build a strong product that will scale and so on and so forth. And if you have those three elements, technology, design, and distribution, you will have sort of checked all the marks of what we look for in founders. We just want a couple of or three strong individuals who we think have the ability to attract very strong talent on the engineering side, on the marketing side, on the sales side, and establish a culture that will allow a company to scale. We try and look for differentiated products because it's so hard to build a company that you really want something that is 10x better, 10x faster than anything on the market. And so things which are just marginally improving something existing will just not cut it. And then we are actually pretty focused on building big companies, and so we want to see the ability to eventually turn into a profitable business that could yield hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. So we tend to align ourselves more on e-commerce, where there's a straightforward business model, SaaS, straightforward business model, or mobility, where the bulk of what we do is actually also with a business model. So we've done quite a bit of momentum plays. So people would just get a ton of users and then one day figure out how to make money. But in this environment, we're less comfortable with those.
I don't know if there is an example of it, but would you be able to give an example of a time when a founder who maybe wasn't that experienced or wasn't necessarily able to show proof that they're able to find that kind of scalability or those specific skills that you're looking for, but they were able to, raise money and you were interested in investing in them and they're able to still prove themselves?
If you go back to the early days of Web 2.0, I would say Aaron Patzer at Mint was a perfect example of that, where, and to be honest, I was one of the first angels in Mint, and I don't think I knew as much then as I know now, but Aaron definitely was able to, as a single individual working on Mint at that time when we invested, were just able to sort of both project a vision and give us sort of a sense of the kind of product experience he would want to offer to its users, that we thought it was actually a great bet to go after.
Very cool. So it's a lot of the time it's not necessarily just about their ability to scale, but also just like who they are and your gut feeling. And
oh yeah, it's the founders, the founding team is the most important thing that we're going to be backing, obviously. But we still look for the three components: founder, product, market opportunity, as a combo, because over the past few years we've seen great founders come up with really uninteresting products, and so we have this sort of challenge of clearing the three set of filters for us to be able to invest. And there is so much deal flow these days, and we only do 20 investments a year, and so it's kind of, we're pretty amazed sometimes at the kinds of companies that we say no to because they're really, really good. But we just got to put some mark and filters and thresholds there so that we can focus on the few companies that we are truly excited about.
All right, I'm going to push a little bit. What's one company that is brand new that not many people know about that you would love to invest in?
Brand new, typically we invest in them, so it's I can't. There's none that comes. The one company which I wish and I tried to invest in and couldn't was Instagram. So that's over the past few couple of years. If there's one which I wish I had been able to, and obviously with the $1 billion acquisition, obviously everyone and his mother would have wished to invest, but I was really sort of in love with the product, and I tried. It's actually the only company that I showed up at their offices, which was the old Twitter office, unannounced, asking for 5 minutes of their time to try and pitch them on an investment. And Kevin, who's become a good friend, didn't have the time. He was busy with his accountant, and so he said no. And Mike, his co-founder, was like, so sorry, but we can't see you. Bye. And
wow.
It's kind of exceptional what they have built, and we'll see where the acquisition by Facebook goes and whether it gets cleared by the FTC and so on and so forth. But regardless of that, the product they've built, the community they've built, is pretty awesome, really.
Yeah, and speaking to what you mentioned as far as like having an amazing design focused kind of application or product, that seems to be super important today, right? Like a lot of the major apps today are putting a ton of focus on design up front. How would you balance that with like the lean startup kind of model of like just getting a basic prototype out and proving it versus like having something that's beautifully designed?
So I think you can't take the lean startup too literally, because people sort of think of lean as cheap, or minimum viable product as a piece of shit that you throw away at users and then iterate from. I think that in this environment, the initial piece of product that you put in front of users in their hands and so on and so forth has to have a lot of the components of the user interaction and the pleasing factor that you want them to experience. Because otherwise, they will sort of look at you, you will drive them to your website, they might actually sign up or whatever, but then they'll see something which is half as built, and then they will just move on and they will never come back.
Very cool. Yeah. Great. So we're about to wrap up here. Last thing, what about like one just big piece of advice, or maybe give it a little like hint at what you're going to speak about at LeWeb?
I would say try. I know it's easy to say since I'm on the VC side and not the entrepreneur side, even though SoftTech is actually a startup, was a startup when I started, and the market was just the VC market. Try and think about something which is going to make a difference and which is going to be potentially big, because it's so hard to build something, and if ever you're successful, you're going to spend the next 5, 7, 10 years of your life on this project. Might as well sort of make it be worth it, and so try and do something which is radically different and which is risky and bold, because that's what we're excited about.
Great. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for your time. This has been great. Hope everyone listening enjoyed it. LeWeb is June 19th and 20th. You'll get to see amazing speakers like Jeff and Jason and Thad and Pebble and a lot more. This will be streamed on YouTube as well, so you can all tune in and make sure to add us on Google Plus so you can see we're going to be doing a lot more interviews with lots of great speakers leading up to the event. So, Jeff, thanks again so much for your time.
See ya. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.